Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Poe, and today I'm doing a dual review of both of María José Ferrada's novels, How to Order the Universe and How to Turn into a Bird. Both of these have been translated from Spanish into English by Elizabeth Bryer. María José Ferrada is a Chilean author, and so far I believe she only has these two novels out, although she also has a bunch of other picture books that she has written, and she's a journalist. But I loved these novels so much, so I wanted to tell you about them, give you an idea of why you might want to pick them up, and just talk about how beautiful the writing is in this. So first, let me tell you what the stories are about. How to Order the Universe is set in the 1980s in Chile, and we follow a 7-year-old girl, M. M has been starting to accompany her father, D, as he travels around to different towns selling cramp hardware. And this is a very unusual childhood, but really forms her understanding of the universe around her. And she sort of builds this philosophy and understanding of life that is especially influenced by the cramp hardware catalog. How to Turn into a Bird is also set in Chile and also follows a child. This one is 12-year-old Miguel. And Miguel has an uncle, Ramon, who recently started a job where he's supposed to be a caretaker of a billboard, and he decides that actually he's gonna go ahead and just live up on the billboard, sort of away from the rest of society and humanity. And Miguel becomes really intrigued by his uncle and his life and his decisions, while also the community around them becomes less and less tolerant of it. So now let me tell you about why I loved both of these books so much, and the first key thing is the writing. The writing is absolutely stunning. I found the writing in both of these books to be incredibly beautiful and poetic and lyrical and incredibly whimsical. Just has this gentleness to it and this incredible atmosphere that really drew me into both books. I really couldn't put these down because of how beautiful the writing was. And I think that's especially impressive given that this is in translation. So I think that Elizabeth Bryer did an amazing job of translating these into English because it's just absolutely stunning. So I wanted to give you an example of just how beautiful and whimsical I found the writing from How to Turn into a Bird. Ramon's new house was just as I had imagined it, a ramshackle nest. It looked like it had been made by a bird that wasn't all that interested in building a lasting monument to its species. The walls, except the one that was the billboard itself, which was the sturdiest of all, or the only sturdy one really, had gaps between one plank and the next, and through those gaps, as I would notice as dusk fell, filtered the light. Holes, and through them came rays that illuminated just one object at a time: the mug sun, the coffee jar satellite, the sugar bag moon. In addition to the writing in general, I think that the choice to use child narrators in these stories is really strong. There is such a gentleness and an innocence in the way that these characters perceive the world around them, even when there are some less than good things going on. And there is just such humor sort of in the way that they perceive things and the way that they make sense of the world. And I think that that just comes through in the writing style, in the narration so well. So I wanted to give you an example also from How to Turn into a Bird. Due to some oversight, a frequent occurrence among our teachers, after moving through a few chapters in the history and geography textbook, we had backtracked to the Latin American capitals: Brazil, Brasilia; El Salvador, San Salvador; Guatemala, Guatemala City; Panama, Panama City. On reaching Mexico, Mexico City, any moderately sharp student would realize that if the person responsible for naming the capitals hadn't put a whole lot of effort into doing their job, then there was no reason to put any effort into persisting with the homework task. I think that both of these books are also just slightly surreal, which really plays into that kind of whimsical writing style. In both of these stories, we have characters who are living kind of unusual lives and who are making sense of their world around them in slightly unusual ways. So in How to Order the Universe, M, the little girl, is traveling with her dad, and she's not in school like she should be, and she's doing all of these things that are very unusual for a little girl to be doing and making sense of the world around her through sort of this cosmology and philosophy that she builds up surrounding the cramp hardware catalog. And so you get her views on the world and the way she sees it, and it's all just slightly surreal. In How to Turn Into a Bird, it's also slightly surreal because Ramon has decided to go live up on this billboard, and every time Miguel is sort of connected to Ramon and we see things through Ramon's eyes and understand how detached he is from reality and from society, and how he is more living in the sky with the birds, right? It just feels a little detached from reality in a very whimsical and beautiful way. There's also a real gentleness in the way that the characters are handled in these stories. In both of these stories, we have a lot of really flawed characters, especially the adults are often not making great choices, but there's a lot of compassion and gentleness in the way that they're handled in the story. For example, Miguel's uncle, Ramon, is an alcoholic, and he's rarely sober in the course of this story, and that is seen as what it is, but it's also treated with understanding and compassion. And in How to Order the Universe, M's mom is largely not really present. So her dad is somebody who's irresponsible and takes her out of school to go do these sales trips, but her mom is just sort of not paying attention. And there's a really lovely section just talking about that, and I think it demonstrates how much compassion there is in these stories. Everything that happened next was only possible because my mother was absent. It wasn't that she left the house much, it was that a part of her had abandoned her body and now resisted coming back. Maybe that fragment of my mother was an astronaut, and on one of her journeys through outer space, she had come across Dee, who, since the moon landing, had developed the habit of peering at the sky every so often, and had decided that the part of her that did come back would stay with him. Or rather, with us. But touchdowns are never easy, and during hers, my mother lost half the vision in her left eye. In that blind spot, what I referred to as my double life started to take place. A mother who was whole would have noticed. Did that make my mother irresponsible? I don't think so. I think that instead, life had been a bit irresponsible with her. And then the last thing that I thought both of these books did really well was the sort of background social and political commentary that is going on. So in both of these, they're really, really focused on these kind of children narrators who are caught up in understanding the adults in the world around them. But one of the things that's happening is in the background, there's really some deeper waters that are going on in both of these books, dealing with some of the nastier aspects of society and politics. So in How to Turn Into a Bird, we have Ramon going up to live on this billboard and Miguel going to visit him and sort of seeing that. But in the background, there's a lot going on in his community where they are not happy that somebody is living up in the billboard. And they're also not happy just about anybody who's not following along and living life the way that they think it should be lived. Especially there are people in a shanty town and nearby, and there is so much anger in this community for non-conformity that plays a big role in how the story unfolds. In How to Order the Universe, we are seeing sort of this focus on M and her dad and the journeys that they're taking. But in the background, this is set in the 1980s in Chile, and they were under the Pinochet regime, and there's a lot of difficulties to do with that regime, as well as the changing economy and how that's affecting the way that people make their livings. And so as the story plays out, those play a bigger role in M's life. So in both of these, I just think that you get this little bit of glimpse into Chilean history and society and politics, but it is very much in the background, and I thought that it was a really gentle way to approach some of those topics while focusing the foreground on these kids and their journeys. Overall, I am just so impressed by María José Ferrada's writing. I think that Both of these books, How to Order the Universe and How to Turn into a Bird, are fantastic. They are really very short novels. They're written for adults, but they have these child narrators, and they have such a beautiful style of writing and a gentleness and a whimsy that completely drew me in, while also having a lot of depth to the characters and the story. They're quiet novels that are just incredibly touching. I really recommend these. And if you guys know of any other authors who have a similar writing style, I would love to hear your recommendations as well, because I just want to read a lot more of the style of writing. If you guys have any comments you want to share with me, just go ahead and leave them down below.